My family stole the inheritance my grandma left me. I spent 5 years quietly gathering evidence. Yesterday, I took it all back. Posting from a throwaway because my relatives know my main account. This is a long one, so grab a coffee. TLDR at the bottom for the lazy. So, 26F, I was 21 when this all started, was extremely close with my grandma. Not in the revisits on holidays away, but in their she basically raised me away. My parents divorced when I was 6, both quickly started new families, and somehow I ended up not really fitting into either one. Except with grandma. I lived with her from the age of 8. She walked me to school, sat with me over homework, sold her own earrings to pay for my English tutor. She wasn't my grandmother. She was my real mom, just 50 years older. Grandma owned a 3-bedroom apartment downtown, a lake house with some land, and savings. Not billions, but by any normal standards, a very decent estate. And here's where the main characters of this story come in. My Uncle Greg, her son, 50 plus, and his wife Karen. Remember Karen? She's the main villain here, and trust me, by the end of this post you will hate her as much as I do. Uncle Greg barely spoke to Grandma. He'd show up once a year on her birthday with a cake from the discount grocery store, sit for an hour complaining about his life, and leave. But when Grandma turned 78 and her heart problems started, Greg and Karen suddenly caught fire with incredible family devotion. They started visiting every week, bringing medications. Karen cooked her soups. I was naive back then and thought, wow, their conscience finally woke up, how sweet. Spoiler, conscience had absolutely nothing to do with it. Grandma told me more than once, in plain words, if the apartment and the lake house go to you, Tesser, name changed. I had everything done properly at the lawyer's office. I've been helping Greg his whole life, he's had enough. I would brush it off, saying a grandma, live to 100, I don't want to talk about this. Which I regret to this day. Because instead of brushing it off, I should have asked, which lawyer, where is the will, and is there a copy? Grandma passed in February, right after I turned 21. I was in such a state that I barely remember the first 2 weeks. And while I was lying flat, unable to eat, Greg and Karen got extremely busy. At the funeral reception, people, Karen came up to me with this sugary little smile and said, Tesser, sweetie, you do understand the apartment goes to Greg, right? He's her only son, next of kin. You're just a grandchild. Legally you're entitled to nothing. But don't worry, we'll let you take Grandma's photo albums. The photo albums. They would let me take the photo albums from the apartment I lived in for 13 years. I said, wait, but Grandma made a will naming me. And Karen, all calm and sweet, there was no will, honey. We checked with the estate attorney. You must have imagined it. Grandma was old, who knows what she said. And here's where it gets interesting. When I pulled myself together a month later and went to the probate office, there really was no will on file. Greg had opened probate as the sole next of kin. Everything clean, everything legal. Apartment, lake house, money, all his. They gave me 2 weeks to get out of the apartment. Me, a college senior, ended up on the street with 2 suitcases and a box of photo albums. Thank God for my best friend who let me crash at her place. Everyone around me said, let it go. My mom, who, reminder, never showed much interest in me, literally said, oh well, what did you expect? He's the son, you're nobody. Thanks, Mom, super supportive. But I didn't let it go. Because I knew Grandma wouldn't lie to me. She said I had everything done properly at the lawyer's. Which means she did. There was only one question: at which office? And where did the will go? So I started digging. Keep in mind, I had no money for attorneys and no connections. I had a laptop, stubbornness, and an all-consuming rage. The first year went into just understanding how the system works. I learned that wills get registered and recorded, and that when probate opens, the records have to be checked. And here's the first thing that didn't add up. If the will was properly on record, Greg couldn't have just inherited everything by default. Which meant either Grandma lied to me, no way, or the will never made it into the records, or it was removed. Or rather, it had been revoked. Year 2. I methodically went around every law office in Grandma's part of town. I'd just walk in and ask if a client by her name had ever been there. Of course nobody would tell me anything. Confidentiality. But one elderly paralegal, when I came in for the third time and just broke down crying right at the front desk, quietly said, sweetheart, have the probate attorney request records of all legal documents your grandmother ever executed. All of them, you hear me? I didn't understand it then, but I remembered it. In parallel, I found a free legal clinic at my university. Law students supervised by a professor take on cases for people who can't afford representation. My case was picked up by a guy, let's call him Jake. He's a practicing attorney now, and if he's reading this, Jake, you're the best. Year 3 brought the first breakthrough. Through an official records request we found out the will existed. Grandma had executed it for years before her death. Everything to me, exactly like she said. And then, pay attention, 3 months before her death, a revocation of the will was executed and notarized. Not a new will naming Greg. Just a revocation. So that everything would pass by default intestacy rules, to the son. 3 months before her death. Exactly the period when Grandma, after her second heart attack, barely got out of bed, mixed up my childhood photos with my high school photos, and sometimes called me by her late sister's name. And exactly the period when Karen was driving her around to doctor's appointments. Except on the very day the revocation was signed, Grandma, according to the medical records I pried out through a mountain of requests, was in such a state that her own physician noted severe cognitive impairment in her chart. And the notary who witnessed the revocation turned out to be from an office on the complete opposite side of the city, which my grandmother, who hadn't left the apartment in weeks, had supposedly travelled to in person. Year 4 we spent putting it all together. Medical records, those records requests. I could write a separate post about how clinics lose documents. A statement from the neighbour, Mrs. Whitmore, who saw Karen loading Grandma into a taxi that exact day, while Grandma was crying and didn't want to go. A statement from the home aide, the one I had hired and Karen had fired a month earlier. Turns out, the aide had refused to assign a little paper as a witness. Bank statements showing that in the last months of Grandma's life, over $100,000 drained out of her account, transferred to a card issued under a power of attorney that Grandma had assigned in that same condition. Year 5, court. We filed to have the revocation declared invalid on the grounds of lack of testamentary capacity. She could not have understood the nature of what she was signing. A posthumous psychiatric evaluation based on her medical records. 3 hearings got postponed because Greg's side kept being sick. Karen sobbed on the stand about how they cared for Mommy Dearest. A while of that girl, me, I was only ever waiting for the inheritance. Quick reminder, I lived with Grandma for 13 years, and they showed up 6 months before the end. Their attorney hammered on the evaluation being a speculative, on the neighbour and making things up, on the aide being a bitter about getting fired. There was a moment when I sat in the courthouse hallway thinking, that's it, 5 years down the drain. And then the expert read out the conclusion. At the time of signing the revocation, the decedent, with a high degree of certainty, lacked the capacity to understand the nature and consequences of her actions. Plus, a detail Jake dug up: the notary who witnessed the revocation was already named in 2 other ongoing disputes with the exact same pattern. Elderly people, sudden revocations of wills, caring relatives. The court declared the revocation invalid, which means the will stands. That will. Grandma's will. Naming me. Greg appealed. He lost. Then they tried to settle it like family. Karen called me, first time in 5 years, and offered to not drag the family through the mud and to split it like relatives should. I answered with her own quote, "Don't worry, I'll let you take the photo albums," and hung up. Best moment of my life. I'm not even sorry. Yesterday I got the final paperwork. The apartment, mine. The lake house, mine. As for the money they managed to siphon off, there's a separate case in progress, and their prospects, as Jake puts it, are not looking great. In the evening I drove to the apartment. On their way out, they stripped the place bare, took everything down to the outlet covers, literally unscrewed the outlet covers. But you know what? I don't care. I stood in Grandma's empty room, where the pencil marks of my height are still on the door frame, the one thing they somehow couldn't take with them, and for the first time in 5 years, I cried from something other than rage. Grandma, I got it all back. You did everything right. I'm sorry it took so long. TLDR, Grandma left me her apartment, lake house, and savings in a will. My uncle and his wife, exploiting her condition after a heart attack, orchestrated a revocation of the will through a shady notary and took everything by default as next of kin, throwing me out on the street. For 5 years, with no money and no connections, I gathered evidence, medical records, witnesses, bank statements. The court ruled the revocation invalid due to lack of capacity, and the will was reinstated. Yesterday I got the papers. Everything Grandma owned is now mine, exactly as she wanted. Edit. Wow, I did not expect this many comments. Thank you all for the support. Answering the most common questions. Yes, a complaint against the notary has been filed. That's a whole separate saga. No, I don't speak to my uncle or my mom, and I don't plan to. Yes, Jake received an enormous cake from me and gets recommended to everyone I know. Edit 2. To everyone commenting a family is more important than money. Family was more important. My family was my grandma. The rest of them made their choice at her funeral reception.